So with that background, let's go back to our main verse for this morning. If children, then heirs, heirs of God. Every child of God will have a basic inheritance, and it's a great inheritance. But among the children of God, some of those children will be joint heirs with Christ if we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together with him. Now, I've tried to explain what it means to be a joint heir and to be glorified. But as I said earlier, I want to come back to this line right here. If we suffer with him, because that's the key line. This is the condition upon which all of that will be experienced. If we suffer with him. Well, what does it mean to suffer with him? Now, first I want to point out, Paul isn't saying if we suffer. You and I are not going to be rewarded for suffering. We will be rewarded if we suffer with him. Now, to suffer with him means to suffer the way he suffered. It means that we respond to trials and troubles the way he responded to his trials and his troubles. I believe when Paul talks about suffering, he's talking about any and every kind of trial or trouble that we might experience in this life. How we respond to it will determine the inheritance that we have in the future kingdom. So it's very important that we think, well, if I'm to suffer with him, I need to think, well, how did Jesus suffer? How did he respond to his trials and troubles? And I want to point out three things from Scripture, three ways that Jesus responded to suffering that are a model or an example for us to follow. First is found in the letter of 1 Peter chapter 2, where Peter says, Christ suffered for us who committed no sin. When Jesus suffered, he didn't sin. Now, he suffered more than any man that's ever lived. No one has suffered to the degree that Jesus suffered. When he suffered as he was going toward the cross, he was mocked. He was ridiculed. He was scorned. He was beaten. He was whipped. He was nailed to a cross and suspended on a cross where people continued to mock him and ridicule him. And how did he respond to that suffering? Did he complain? Did he utter threats to the people that threatened him? Did he hold a grudge? Did he hold a resentment toward those that were doing him wrong? Not a bit of that. Jesus didn't complain. He laid down his life. He didn't speak back at those that spoke evil things toward him. He didn't respond in kind. As a matter of fact, he said to those that nailed him to the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Did he hold resentment in his heart? No, not at all. He suffered without sin. And here's a second way that Jesus suffered. It's with prayer. Matthew tells us that he prayed. This is the night before he was crucified. He prayed saying, Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. As Jesus anticipated the sufferings of the cross, he poured out his heart to his Father in prayer. Because he knew that prayer was the key. Staying in touch with his Father in prayer, calling out to his Father, depending on his Father, was the key in responding to the sufferings that he was about to endure. So Jesus suffered with prayer. He suffered without sin. He suffered with prayer. And here's the third thing. As we read in Hebrews chapter 12, Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross. When Jesus was hanging there on that cross, he was thinking about the joy that was to come. He was focused on what the future held. He had his hope. He had his joy fixed on what would lie ahead. I believe that Jesus had the same thoughts in his mind that Paul shared with us earlier in Romans 8. Jesus was thinking, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that will be revealed to me when this is over. Jesus is our example. And here's a summary of the way that he suffered. 3 things. He suffered without sin, he suffered with prayer, and he suffered with the joy that was set before him. Paul is calling us in Romans chapter 8. God is speaking to us through Paul in Romans chapter 8 and saying to us, I'm calling you to suffer with Jesus. I'm calling you to respond to your trials and your troubles the same way Jesus responded to his. So let me ask you, as I ask myself, are you responding to your trials and troubles the way Jesus did? Are you responding without sin? When you face trials and troubles or a crisis, do you complain? Do you get angry? Do you say things to people that are hurtful? Do you hold resentment in your heart toward those that may have contributed to these trials and troubles that you're going through? Or do you give thanks? Do you forgive? Do you trust God to help you to not speak words that you shouldn't say? If so, you're suffering with Christ, and you are gaining a greater inheritance on a future day. All right, the second one, with prayer. When you're going through trials and troubles, you're going through a crisis, do you just focus on the crisis, or do you focus on your Father? Do you call out to him in prayer to help you to face the trial and the trouble, to give you grace and strength to endure it and to live by faith in the midst of it like Jesus did? If you are, then you're suffering with Christ. You are becoming a joint heir with Christ. You are gaining a greater inheritance on a future day. And then finally, with the joy set before him. When you go through trials and troubles, do you have an eternal perspective? Are you thinking about what lies ahead? Are you thinking, as Paul wrote earlier, I consider that the sufferings of this present time aren't worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed on a future day. If I just suffer with Christ today, if I suffer the way Jesus suffered, what joy it is that is set before me. If you think like that, if you pray like that, if you trust God like that, you're suffering with Jesus. And here's what Paul tells us once again in the verse that we're focused on today, Romans 8:17. If children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together with him. Every child of God is going to gain a basic inheritance, the glory of the liberation from sin and a life with God in his kingdom that will last forever. But some of God's children are going to gain a bonus inheritance with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him today. And that's our hope. That's our certain expectation. That's what gets us through a time of crisis, a time of trouble, a time of difficulty, is hope, expectation, eternal perspective, looking forward to what God has promised, a certain expectation of what we know will happen in the future. And what we know for sure will happen in the future is every child of God has that basic inheritance. And that if we suffer with him, God has promised that we'll receive a bonus inheritance just as Jesus did. So here's the bottom line of the message today, and is this. We find hope in a time of crisis in the promise of reward. In a time of crisis, we need to think about the reward that God offers, because that gives us hope to face and to move through and endure, and to have hope in the midst of the crisis. We find hope in a time of crisis in the promise of reward. All right, we finished our series as of now, but I want to review what we've looked at these past 3 weeks. Here's what we looked at the first week. We find hope in a time of crisis in the promise of the rapture. Then last week, we looked at the second thing in the end time prophecies, and today in the promise of reward. Now, may God help me, may He help you to remember these 3 critical, important truths that give us hope, not only in a time of crisis, but as long as we live in the midst of our problems and struggles and troubles.